Then in what he calls a gallery, there are three pictures in sort of two different spaces. A Carl Benjamin painting from 1967 called Totem Group 5 on the far left, and then to the right, because these are related Los Angeles-based artists, a picture by Lurser Feidelson from 1948, Magical Space Forms. It's interesting to me that Tom developed this taste for hard edge abstraction as it was practiced in Los Angeles after World War II, but he knew well this work and also that of John McLaughlin, who's the other great practitioner of this style. It's a kind of American version of Cubism, only there's a deep interest in incorporating these very public colors, the kind of color that you might only see in the sort of clear sunlight of Los Angeles, not so typically a New York palette. Then in the middle, a painting by a younger artist, Pat Lipsky, called Red River Valley, number 5, from 2004. But you can see this, Tom's unceasing taste for composition, both kinesthetic and visual. Then in another part of the house, but nearby, two important pictures, one on the left by the American muralist and important Mondrian disciple, Ilya Bolotowski. The picture is called Untitled Neoplastic Rectangle 1951. Then to the right, and I'll show these separately, an interesting and again under-recognized American painter from Indian Territory, now called Oklahoma, and he himself was partly American Indian. This is Leon Polk Smith's picture, Red, White, Black, from 1948. Now that's the picture in a kind of artificial isolation, and its sister painting by Bolotowski. And I realized the other day, looking at this, there's sort of maps of Tom's obsessive sense of order, which demonstrates itself all the way through the house. Particularly, in my opinion, this Leon Polk Smith picture, which is something of a plan from above. These are the East Coast equivalents to those West Coast hard edge abstractionists. And interestingly enough, Tom knew their work well and included it in a very important show, American Painting, that he made in Munich in 1981, which I think was sort of the most ambitious of his early attempts at being a curator while being a director, which can be a fatal combination. He was clever about carrying it off. Then another view of the Lipsky painting. I know better the ceramist in the back, the sculptor called Andrew Lord. You see a very hand-formed hourglass shape that's actually baked clay, and this is a very interesting younger artist in his 60s today who typifies a willingness to have an informal aesthetic inside sculpture making, and I'm impressed that Tom had a taste for his work. He's one of my personal favorites as well. Then in another quarter, I'm sorry for the acute angle of the photograph, a painting by Thornton Willis, again, a lesser-known artist from American artist from the South. Spinback, this is from 2008. He eloquently describes his attraction to the picture in the book, but I think what he's doing is demonstrating in various forms his own spatial perceptions in using other people's art as a way to demonstrate to himself ways that he saw things. That's less true in another quarter, which I hope Tom explains to us how these two relate, but a painting by John Opper, a lesser-known artist from 1957 called Iota, again, a Hoffman student, typical of the second generation of abstract expressionists, whose credo might be, I touch, therefore I am. This is a picture that has a companion nearby in a painting by Edward Dugmore, who's a better-known artist and a well-known disciple of Clifford Still, studying with Still in 1948 to 1950. This picture from 1954 shows Dugmore sort of beginning to make his own subject matter after the very heavy influence of Clifford Still. In any case, these are different pictures than the ones I showed you before, but these might be seen as sort of landscape surrogates, whereas the others could be thought of as architecture surrogates. Then come two chaotic pictures, which is probably typical of Tom also, that he can accommodate all this in one house. Norman Bloom's painting from 1959 called Open Red, one of the most gestural of the late abstract expressionist gesturalist. And then what looks to be like a very important picture to me, this is Alfred Leslie's painting, also from 1959, called Number 25, very important picture inside the final evolution of abstraction, which was about to be eclipsed in 1962-63 when pop art so overtook abstract painting that even artists of the magnitude of de Kooning sort of went into hiding. Then Stray Pictures, this is by Tom Naskowski from 2004, a small painting, but a kind of eccentric abstraction, which I know Tom had a taste for. He was always a great fan of Richard Tuttle's, and this was reminiscent in some ways of Tuttle's aesthetic. A Japanese screen, which he says in the text he always had a taste for, and I think there's a companion garden. This is a 19th century screen that sets a mood, I reckon, in the hallway. And then finally, this painting by Paul Feely, who was another Hoffman student teaching at Bennington for many years, and an early proponent of stain painting. This picture, 1962, Carthage, is slightly atypical in that more often than not, the paintings have a very severe, hard-edged, but optical feel to them. This looks more like a recessive painting to me. He, in Acts of Loyalty, and I think also because he loves dearly this couple, George and Betty Woodman, re-invited them after they'd already done something at Hoover Hall to do something else at Hoover Nest. So this is George Woodman's splash wall in the pantry. You see the drawing underneath and then the ceramic tile above. On the left, Bunty's bathroom at Hoover Hall, which I suppose was fairly destroyed in the fire, but one piece, amphora, was salvaged out for Hoover Nest, and that's on the right side. And then this big and very beautiful heroic three-part piece by Betty called The Bathers, revisited from 2004. Some of you may recall her wonderful exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum recently. And then a picture from Bunty, I guess, by Andrew Masullo as a gift to Tom. Okay. There we go. In those days, Tom was surrounded by, including me, a whole cadre of very young curators or want-to-be curators, and he was generous to people and demanding at the same time. And he never really said, don't do that. He'd always push you to do something that was the most ambitious idea that you might come forward with. But he used those relationships among the 4 or 5 of us as a way to get to know another younger generation of artists. And so here's a demonstration of that leap of faith and vision on his part, prints by a 60-year-old artist whom you probably know well, called Terry Winters, made in 1992. These are prints that I see are in the dressing room. Terry had had a one-person show early in his career in the 1980s at the Whitney Museum. And it's typical of Tom that he'd move ahead with artists that he got to know through us that way. Then finally, back in the sitting room, I thought it'd be good to end with this picture by Ray Parker, who, again, is from that generation of artists born in the 1920s who had their moment, in particular, in the late 1950s. Parker, from what I know, was really one of the younger artists most influenced by Mark Rothko, and the pictures that we know better than these are the ones where he's using a stain technique to put shapes on an unprimed canvas. This is a slightly later picture from 1970, untitled, but you can see in this not only a deep connection to the world of Rothko, but also to the forms of Matisse, which I think is perfect as a summary for Tom's taste, so connected to nature and so rooted in that period, 1935 to 1970, which he typified so elegantly. So that's a kind of fast overview of what I know of Hooverness. Now you'll hear from an expert.